Look, there is a whole generation of people right now who did every single thing the system told them to do. They went to college, they got the internships, often unpaid ones. They built the LinkedIn profiles at 19 years old, and not for a job they wanted yet, just because they'd heard that was a thing you do now. They optimized their morning routines before they had anything remotely worth optimizing for. They created content about their journey before the journey had produced any results worth documenting. They attended the networking events, which to be clear are genuinely miserable for everyone involved. They got the certifications. They downloaded the productivity apps. They set the 5 a.m. alarms. They journaled their goals. They read the books about the habits of successful people. They followed the right accounts. They put the right keywords in their bio. And they are burnt out, not tired, burnt out. That specific kind of numbness where you don't want to scroll anymore, because every scroll is just a reminder that someone else seems to be doing it better, and you genuinely can't tell anymore whether you're doing it wrong or whether the game itself is rigged. 74% of Gen Z workers now experience at least moderate levels of burnout, making them the most burnt-out generation in the workforce. The average American hits peak burnout at 42 years old. Gen Z's hitting it at 25, 17 years earlier than the historical average. A quarter of Americans are burnt out before they're 30 years old. Some of them haven't even started their careers in any meaningful sense. They are burnt out in the preparation phase, in the runway, before takeoff. How does that happen? How do you burn out before you start? That's the question I actually want to answer today. Not in the therapy sense, not in the set better boundaries and practice self-care sense, in the system sense. Because what I'm going to argue is that this burnout isn't random. It isn't a character flaw in an entire generation, and it isn't going to be solved by a better sleep schedule. It's an output. It's what the machine produces. And we're going to explain how the machine works, why it was practically designed to produce this exact result, and why the way most people are currently framing this problem is making it structurally harder to escape. This is not a mental health video, it's a financial architecture video. So, before I get into any of the specific mechanics, I want to give you the central image that I'm going to come back to throughout everything that follows. Picture a treadmill. A treadmill is a machine where you expend completely real energy and go absolutely nowhere. You can run a 6-minute mile on a treadmill. You can sprint until your lungs give out. The sweat soaking through your shirt is real. The burning in your calves is real. The cardiovascular stress, the caloric burn, the physical exhaustion, all completely real, measurable, undeniable. Your heart rate is not lying to you, but your location is exactly the same as when you started. Now, imagine someone sold you that treadmill and told you it was a path. Not metaphorically, literally. They said, "Get on here, put in the effort, we'll arrive somewhere good." And you believed them because every single person around you was also running. The people selling the treadmills had doctoral degrees in treadmill science. There were entire industries built around optimizing your stride mechanics. There were conferences about treadmill running. There were influencers with millions of followers teaching you how to breathe correctly on the treadmill. There were books, actual best-selling books about the daily habits of the world's most elite treadmill runners. Nobody put on the label that it was still a treadmill. That's the situation Gen Z inherited. Not entirely, not for everyone, but structurally, systemically, in the aggregate. And I want to walk through exactly how the belt speed got set, who set it, and why the machine never had much incentive to be honest with the runners. There are 4 layers to this. Each one is worse than the one before it. By the end, the real problem is going to look quite different from how it looks at the beginning. That's intentional. Let's start with the most visible one. From roughly the early 1980s onward, there was an understood deal in America. The deal was go to college, get a degree, get a job, and the job pays enough that the degree was worth buying. Plain transaction, and for a while, for maybe 20 years, that deal was real. You could borrow somewhere between $8,000 and $14,000 for a 4-year education, take an entry-level job paying $28,000 to $32,000, and within 3 to 4 years, you were genuinely building towards something. The math worked, not comfortably, but it worked. Then the belt speed changed. College tuition started increasing at roughly 6 to 8% annually, not inflation-level increases, compounding increases sustained for decades. Meanwhile, entry-level wages across most non-technical fields were growing at somewhere between 2 and 3% per year over the same period. So, the input, the cost of the credential, was compounding at 2 to 3 times the rate of the output, the income the credential was supposed to unlock. Run that forward for 25 years, and you end up in the situation we're actually in. Americans collectively now owe more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt, with balances having increased sixfold since 2003. Sixfold in roughly 20 years. And it's not because people started going to worse schools or taking easier degrees. It's because the sticker price of the credential inflated dramatically faster than anyone's ability to repay it. Here is what this looks like in concrete numbers, because I think abstract statistics are easy to absorb and forget, and I'd rather you actually understand the arithmetic. GenZ is now paying an average of $526 a month in student loan payments, nearly double the national average of $284 per month. That number hit after major repayment relief programs ended, and income-driven repayment options were curtailed. $526 a month. That's $6,312 a year leaving your account before you buy a single thing. Now, let's pair that with the income side. Non-college graduates earn about $68,400 on average, according to ZipRecruiter's 2025 survey of recent graduates. Sounds reasonable until you factor taxes, which bring you to roughly $43,000 to $46,000 in actual take-home. Divide that by 12, about $3,800 a month if the math goes well. Now rent, a one-bedroom apartment in any city where entry-level professional jobs actually concentrate, any city with a functioning corporate job market, is running somewhere between $1,800 a month. Let's call it $2,100 and be conservative. That's 55% of your take-home before you've bought food, paid utilities, covered transportation, or dealt with health insurance premiums. Add the $526 in loan payments and you've just consumed 84% of your monthly income on rent and debt service alone. There's nothing left to build with. More than half, 56% of GenZ borrowers say their student loan obligations directly limit their ability to save or invest. And 84% of GenZ with student loan debt have put off major investments such as buying a home or starting a business. That second number is the one that keeps compounding against them in ways they don't always see clearly, because the cost of student debt is not only the interest you pay, it's the investing you don't do, it's the business risk you don't take, it's the equity position you don't accept because the base salary was too low to cover your obligations. 72% of GenZ make or have made employment decisions based on their student loan debt, meaning they took the safer, lower upside job because the riskier one didn't guarantee enough income to cover the monthly payment. So the debt doesn't just cost money, it costs optionality, it costs the decision-making freedom that actually produces wealth over a lifetime. And nobody in the admissions process mentioned that part. Now here is the incentive layer under all of this, because this is where it gets interesting from a system standpoint. Universities get paid when you enroll. They don't get paid based on your income 5 years after graduation. The incentive is to get you through the door with sufficient financing to cover tuition. As one economist put it, the death of the social contract, the expectation that a university education would result in a well-paying job, has left many young people navigating a far more precarious landscape. What happened after that social contract ended? The institutions kept selling it anyway, because the institutions had no financial incentive to stop. GenZ graduates expected to earn $101,500 in their first job. That's a $33,000 expectation gap compared to what they actually earned. Career services offices tell average salaries without distinguishing between engineering and humanities majors. Salary websites aggregate data across experience levels. LinkedIn feeds amplify outlier success stories, while individual struggles remain invisible. The result is a generation calibrated to expect compensation levels that only a fraction of graduates actually achieve. So, the credential machine churns. More people earn degrees. The degree becomes less differentiating because supply went up while actual employer demand for that specific credential didn't rise proportionally. The market's response, and this is the part that is quietly absurd, is to raise the floor. Now you need a master's degree for the job that used to require a bachelor's or 3 years of experience for an entry-level position. Entry-level job postings have declined 29% since January of 2024. The jobs designed for people without experience are disappearing, and the people being told to get more experience in order to qualify are being told this by a market that won't hire them until they already have the experience they can't get because the market won't hire them. You think the credential gap is the problem, but the credential gap is just a symptom. The incentive structure is the problem, and the incentive structure was never designed to fix itself. The treadmill doesn't slow down because you're tired. That's not what it's for. Now, let's go to the second layer. And this one made things worse in a completely different direction. Around 2013, 2014, something fully locked into the cultural conversation around work and money. Hustle culture went mainstream. And I don't mean in a background noise way. I mean it became the dominant ideology of upward mobility for an entire generation. The message was direct. The reason you're not where you want to be financially is that you aren't working hard enough. Wake up earlier, sleep less, build the side hustle, build multiple side hustles, stack your income streams. The people who are rich worked harder. The people who are broke are lazy, or too comfortable, or not hungry enough. I understand why this message was compelling. It arrived at a moment when the old deal, work for one company for 40 years, get a pension, retire, was visibly dead. The job market was unstable, wages weren't growing, the credential trap was starting to bite. People needed a new framework for upward mobility, and hustle culture gave them one. It said you can outwork the gap, you have agency. The system can't stop you if you just refuse to stop. That's a genuinely powerful message when you feel like the formal pathways are closing. The problem is that it was right about exactly one thing and wrong about everything else. The one thing it was right about, effort matters, obviously. You cannot produce nothing and expect something back. That's not an insight, that's physics. Everything else, wrong. Because hustle culture conflated effort with leverage. And those are not the same variable. Effort is the amount of input you put in. Leverage is the ratio between what you put in and what comes out. High leverage, small inputs, large outputs, non-linear relationship between your hours and your returns. Low leverage, 1 hour of your time equals 1 hour of someone else's money, and if you stop giving hours, the money stops. Trading time for money directly, a salary, a freelance hourly rate, a service business billed by the minute is structurally low leverage. You get paid exactly as much as you work. Hustle culture was work harder inside a low leverage structure, which is mechanically speaking a treadmill moving at a higher belt speed. The person working 65 hours a week trading their time for money is exhausted and not significantly wealthier than the person working 45 hours if both of them are inside the same linear structure. One of them is just more tired. The effort is real, the discipline is real, the exhaustion is real, but the relationship between time invested and wealth generated is still one-to-one, and the ceiling on that relationship is set by the number of hours in a day, which is not negotiable. Now, here's the second-order effect that made this worse specifically for Gen Z. Hustle culture arrived on social media, which meant the hustle didn't just happen, it had to be performed. Document the grind, show the 5 a.m. alarm screenshot, film the morning routine, post a late-night coding session, build your brand around the work you're doing, turn the effort itself into content, and turn the content into an audience, and turn the audience into something. Money somehow eventually. This added a third layer of labor to a 2-layer system. You were working the job, you were working the side hustle, and now you were working the production of content about the working. 3 labor inputs, 1 linear income stream, and 0 leverage across any of it. 71% of Gen Z employees have what researchers classify as unhealthy work health scores compared to just 42% of baby boomers. That gap is not produced by a generation that doesn't want to work. It's produced by a generation working inside structures that don't build toward anything that compounds. The treadmill doesn't care how fast you run, but if you run on it long enough, it will break your legs, and then you'll write content about the recovery process. Now, here's the third layer, and this one is I think the most psychologically costly and the least accurately named. Somewhere around 2016-2017, a very specific message became inescapable. Build your personal brand. Be authentic online. Your identity is your product. Let the world see who you are and grow an audience around that. Monetize your personality. You are the asset. I want to be precise about this because there is a version of it that actually works. If you have genuine expertise, a real perspective, something with actual signal in it, building an audience creates legitimate leverage. That's a real mechanism. I'm not dismissing the whole thing. What I'm talking about is the version of this message that got delivered to 18 and 19-year-olds, people who are still actively in the process of figuring out who they actually are, and told them to commodify that process publicly. Think carefully about what that does to a developing person. When your identity is your product, every dimension of your self-concept becomes subject to market feedback. Your opinions are now measured in engagement numbers. Your sense of humor gets a /be tested in your head. That post got 32 likes, this one got 400. What does that mean about the difference between me in those two moments? Your genuine interests start getting filtered for a single question. But is this content? But will this grow the page? But does this fit the brand I've been building for the last 8 months? And the most corrosive part, when the product doesn't perform, it does not feel like a business problem, it feels like a personal one. Consider the mechanics. If you launch a product and it doesn't sell, you have market data. You iterate, you adjust, you move on. The product failing is useful information. But if you share yourself, your real opinions, your actual personality, your genuine sense of humor, your actual face, and nobody engages, that registers somewhere completely different in the nervous system because you didn't put a product on the shelf, you put yourself on the shelf, and the shelf said not interested. Now do that for 2 years inside an environment where the algorithm changes every 6 months, where trends evaporate every 3 weeks, where platforms arbitrarily reduce your reach by 60% for reasons they will never explain or even acknowledge, and where every time you open the app, you are shown a carefully selected feed of the people who are apparently doing it better than you. Your nervous system is not calibrated to contextualize that comparison correctly. You see the result, not the process. You see the win, not the 30 failed attempts that preceded it. Social media feeds continue the cycle of comparison and performance long after work ends. Research shows that younger workers struggle more than older generations to disconnect, with only 1/3 of 18 to 24-year-olds saying they can switch off from work when needed. This constant connectivity creates what psychologists describe as cognitive overload, a state where the brain never fully recovers from stimulation. Now, add the structural economics of the platforms, because this is the layer most people don't examine clearly. What is a content creator actually inside the economy of a social media platform? You are a supplier of raw material. You produce content. The platform takes that content and uses it to sell advertising inventory. The platform captures the advertising revenue running into the billions of dollars per quarter. You capture in most cases $0 from that transaction directly, unless you reach a scale that qualifies you for revenue sharing programs, which the vast majority of creators never reach. What you receive instead is reach, engagement, followers, which have value only if you can convert them into something that actually pays. Most people never successfully build the commercial layer on top of the audience layer. They accumulate followers, spend years optimizing for engagement, and have no mechanism to turn any of it into money. So, the platform took your creative energy, converted it into advertising revenue, returned social metrics to you, and called the arrangement an opportunity. You did the work. The platform took the money, you got the dopamine. That's not a partnership, that's a harvest and you were the crop. When you tie your sense of self to a system that is structurally positioned to extract value from you without returning it proportionally, when you are simultaneously the worker and the product and the customer, the exhaustion that results is not standard work fatigue, it's existential. It's the specific kind of tired that shows up after years of producing and optimizing and iterating and looking up to realize you still don't know what you want, who you are, or whether any of the effort has been compounding into anything at all. Financial insecurity among Gen Z jumped from 30% in 2024 to 48% in 2025, an 18 percentage point increase, a 60% spike in a single year. That happens to a generation that was working, that was posting, that was grinding, that was showing up every day on the treadmill with absolute consistency. The identity trap is this: they were encouraged to invest their sense of self into systems that were designed to extract value from them, not build wealth for them. And when those systems didn't produce the financial outcomes they implied they would, the cost wasn't just financial because the asset that underperformed wasn't their portfolio, it was them. You can recover from a bad investment. It is considerably harder to recover from feeling like you yourself were the bad investment. That particular belief tends to make every subsequent financial decision worse because every subsequent financial decision gets filtered for a self-concept that has been marked down. To be fair, there are people who spotted this dynamic very early. Somewhere around 2009, a fairly obscure tech blogger wrote something like, "Platforms that make money by turning users into content will eventually make content out of the users themselves." Everyone who read it replied along the lines of, "Okay, relax, I just want to share my photos." The blogger was right, everyone did share their photos. The platform used the behavioral data from those photos to build the most effective advertising targeting system ever created. The photos were lovely though. Okay, now here is where I've been building toward, and this is the layer that I think reframes everything else. I've described 3 layers of the system: the credential trap, the hustle trap, the identity trap. And if you've been following the logic, the natural conclusion you're building toward is the system is broken, someone should fix it, there should be reform, the university should be held accountable for outcomes, the platform should pay creators fairly, the employers should pay wages that actually support the cost of living in the cities where the jobs are. Maybe all of that is true. I'm not here to argue policy, but here's the reversal I've been setting up. The system is not broken. The system is working exactly as it was designed to work. It is just not designed to benefit you. Let me be very precise because I'm not making a conspiratorial argument. There is no room somewhere with a group of suited executives designing a trap for young workers. That's not how systems work. Systems work through incentives. Incentives aggregate into structures. Structures produce predictable outputs. No single person built this. It emerged from the collision of multiple independent incentive sets, and the output happens to be very convenient for a small number of entities and very inconvenient for a large number of people. That's not a conspiracy, that's just how poorly aligned incentive structures behave at scale. Think about each piece: the credential system where the bar keeps rising and the price keeps compounding without the income ceiling rising to match. That system is excellent for 2 groups: the institutions selling credentials who collect tuition regardless of outcome, and the employers who can raise the hiring bar without raising compensation. If requiring a master's degree becomes the norm for a role that used to need a bachelor's, the employer just got a more qualified pool of applicants at the same price. They didn't offer more, the applicants brought more credentials to the same offer because the system convinced them they had no choice. That's a structurally ideal outcome for the buyer of the labor. A culture that tells workers their output is a direct reflection of their character, their discipline, their worth as a human being. That is ideal for any organization that depends on the energy of those workers and prefers not to increase wages. Workers who believe their value is determined by their effort are very difficult to underpay, because when they feel the gap between what they produce and what they receive, their first instinct is to question themselves, not the structure. Maybe I'm not working hard enough. Maybe I need better systems. Maybe I need to wake up earlier. They optimize their personal systems rather than challenging the terms of the arrangement. This is enormously convenient for the arrangement. An identity economy that turns creative people's personalities, time, and emotional energy into content for advertising inventory. That is a staggeringly efficient extraction machine. Billions of dollars of creative labor going in, advertising revenue you going to the platform, social metrics going back to the creators as a kind of currency that keeps them producing without them needing to be paid. The loop is self-sustaining. The platform doesn't force anyone to create. The psychological feedback loop of social metrics does it automatically. The machine runs on your need for validation. In exchange, it provides you with validation. Enough to keep you going, but not enough to make you solvent. And the second-order effect across all 3, people who are exhausted, financially stressed, identity confused, and perpetually chasing metrics they don't fully control are very busy people. Very busy people don't have time to think clearly about leverage. They don't have time to build systems that would reduce their dependence on the systems extracting from them. The treadmill keeps you occupied enough that stepping off it requires an active and deliberate choice that most people, when they're this tired, don't have the bandwidth to make. Gen Z and millennials hit peak burnout at just 25 years old, 17 years earlier than the average American. That's not a coincidence. That is a scheduled output of these combined systems operating simultaneously on the same population. The credential machine, the hustle machine, the identity machine, they each consume energy and return less than they take. Stack them and you get exhaustion before 30. And here's why identifying this correctly matters so much practically. If you believe the system is broken, your strategy is to wait for someone to fix it. You advocate, you vote, you petition, you demand reform. These are not useless things in a civic sense, but they have a very long time horizon, and you cannot build wealth in the meantime by waiting for external repair. If you understand that the system is working as designed, that it is actively optimized for extracting value from people who don't understand the extraction, then the strategy changes fundamentally. You don't fix an extraction machine by running harder inside it. You understand the mechanics of the extraction, and then you deliberately build outside of them. Let me make this concrete with a specific scenario. Realistic numbers, no inspiration required. 2 people, same starting point. Call them Marcus and Daniel. Both 22 years old, both graduated from the same state university, same degree, General Business Administration. Both above average in intelligence and work ethic. Both walking out the door with $35,000 in student loan debt. Marcus does what the system designed him to do. He applies broadly, updates his LinkedIn, does the networking, lands an analyst role at a mid-size company in a mid-size city. $59,000 a year. His rent is $1,700 a month. He starts making his minimum loan payments, roughly $400 monthly. He contributes 5% to his 401k, because that's what's needed to capture the employer match. He follows finance accounts on social media and feels like he's making the right moves. In principle, he is. In practice, after taxes, rent, loan payments, food, transportation, and basic life expenses, he's saving somewhere between $200 and $400 a month in good months. Some months, nothing. 2 years pass, he gets promoted, salary goes to $65,000. He's pleased, he bumps his savings rate slightly. He still has roughly $29,000 in student debt because interest kept accruing in the first year before he understood the repayment mechanics. He's not failing, he's not irresponsible, he's just not building any kind of momentum. Every raise gets partially absorbed by modest lifestyle adjustments, slightly better groceries, a weekend trip, one nicer piece of furniture. His free cash flow grows, but slowly, and it keeps getting intercepted by the ordinary randomness of life. Car repair, a medical coterie, a flight home for a family event. At 27, Marcus has about $17,000 in his 401k. He has roughly $23,000 in remaining student debt. His salary is around $73,000. He is not struggling in any visible sense. He is also not building toward anything that looks meaningfully different from where he is right now. He is on the treadmill of reasonable, sustainable pace. Daniel makes a different set of architectural decisions, not because he's smarter or more disciplined, because he spent more time thinking about structure. Same $35,000 in debt. He takes a job at $56,000, slightly less than Marcus, because he was more selective and it took him 6 extra weeks. The trade-off was that he joined a smaller organization where he would have more visibility, broader scope, and faster feedback cycles on his actual work quality. Not more prestige, more leverage. In the first 12 months, Daniel does something specific and deliberate. He does not attempt to start a business, he does not try to build a social following, he does not launch a side hustle. He identifies one high-leverage skill and develops it as deeply as he possibly can in his job context. In his case, performance marketing. How paid acquisition actually works at a technical level. How to interpret attribution data. How to calculate customer lifetime value against acquisition cost, how to run structured experiments and read the results with statistical literacy. He gets good enough, measurably, demonstrably good enough, that his campaigns outperform the company average by a meaningful margin. At the 15-month mark, he makes a specific move. He documents his results rigorously and goes to his manager with a business-framed conversation. Not, "I deserve more money." That's emotional framing. Instead, "Here's the output I'm generating relative to the company average. Here's the market rate for someone generating this output. Here are 3 ways to align my compensation with my performance." They say yes to 2 of the 3. His compensation moves to $67,000 with a performance-tied bonus of up to $6,000. In parallel, not instead of the job, Daniel begins consulting. 2 clients at a time, never more, while the job is still his primary learning vehicle. Each client is a small to mid-sized company that wants better paid marketing results. He charges $1,500 a month per client to 15 hours of work. That's $3,000 additional per month, approximately $36,000 extra per year, for work he does on evenings and weekends. His effective total income at 24 years old is approaching $97,000. And here is the one decision that separates everything. He does not expand his lifestyle to match. His monthly expenses stay calibrated to roughly where they were at $56,000. This is the move most people skip. The income goes up, the lifestyle does not automatically follow. The gap between what he earns and what he spends, after taxes, after debt payments, is somewhere around $2,800 to $3,200 per month. That surplus goes directly into 2 things. Index funds in a taxable brokerage account, consistently, automatically. And at month 22, a content website in a niche he understands from his marketing work, purchased from a seller who didn't want to operate it anymore. Purchase price $11,500. Revenue acquisition $950 per month. Within 9 months of structured optimization, not reinvention, just fixing the things that were fixable with skills he already has, that site generates $1,400 a month. He's putting maybe 50 hours total on the project in that period. The ratio of his hours to output is non-linear. That's the point, not passive in the Instagram caption sense, non-linear. The distinction matters. At 27, Marcus has $17,000 in a 401k, $23,000 in remaining debt, a salary of $73,000, monthly free cash flow somewhere around $400 on a normal month. Daniel has $46,000 in combined investment accounts, has paid off approximately $27,000 of his debt, owns 2 online assets generating a combined $2,100 per month, runs a consulting practice producing $5,000 to $6,000 per month. His total monthly income is approaching $14,000 and his expenses are $6,000 because he calibrated them deliberately and increased them on his own terms, not by default. Same degree, same starting debt, same city tier, same work ethic, genuinely different architecture. Marcus followed the map the system provided. Daniel spent 18 months understanding the territory before committing to a direction. One of them is on a treadmill, the other one built a gym and owns it. The asymmetry compounds every year, and the point at which the asymmetry becomes too large to reverse comes earlier than most people expect. Alright, let me bring this back to where we started. 74% of Gen Z experiencing at least moderate burnout. Peak burnout hitting at 25, 17 years before the historical average. Financial insecurity jumping 18 points in a single year. And this happening to a generation that by every effort metric is working extremely hard, documenting the work, optimizing the work, and posting about optimizing the work. We said we were going to explain how this machine works and why it's getting weird. Here is the honest summary. The credential machine made the path longer and more expensive without making the destination more valuable. The hustle machine told people to run faster inside a linear system and called it wealth strategy. The identity machine turned self-concept into inventory for advertising platforms that kept the money. And all 3 machines were doing exactly what their respective incentive structures dictated. Nobody broke anything. Nothing malfunctioned. The outputs are deliberate, not accidental. And the outputs of burnout, financial stagnation, and a pervasive grinding sense that your effort isn't accumulating into anything. You think effort is the key variable. The system wants you to think that, but leverage is the key variable. And effort without leverage is just speed on a treadmill. Fast, sweaty, real, and completely stationary. Here are 3 things, specific ones, not motivational, mechanical. The first, learn one high leverage skill deeply before you attempt to monetize anything. Not 10 skills, not a broad surface of competences, one skill that has external market value, meaning someone who is not your employer would pay you for it at rates the market sets, not rates your employer negotiates. Paid acquisition, software development at professional level, data analysis and modeling, high-performance sales, financial structuring, legal knowledge in a specialized area. Pick one. Spend 12 to 18 months developing it inside a job context where you are paid to learn and where the feedback loop is based on real business outcomes, not arbitrary grades. When you have genuine depth in that skill, not familiarity depth, you have something with non-linear economic properties. You can consult on it. You can apply it to your own projects. You can trade it for equity instead of salary. You now have leverage, which is structurally different from having a job. The distinction between a skill that provides leverage and a skill that provides labor is this. A leverage skill produces value even when you're not actively working or produces value at a rate that exceeds your hours invested. A labor skill requires you to be present for every dollar it earns. Both are valid during the learning phase, but you want to be moving toward the first category. The second, build the asset layer before you expand the expense layer. This is mathematically obvious and behaviorally very hard. The default human behavior is income increases, lifestyle increases to match, net worth stays approximately flat. Every raise gets absorbed by a slightly better apartment, a slightly nicer car, slightly more eating out, a slightly more expensive vacation. The lifestyle expands at roughly the same rate as income. The gap between what you earn and what you keep stays narrow and nothing compounds. The alternative requires a deliberate sustained decision to maintain the gap. Here's why the timeline matters so dramatically. If you are 23 years old and you invest even $200 a month into something growing at a conservative 8% annually, over 30 years you accumulate approximately $300,000. Start that same habit at 33 instead of 23 with the same amount at the same rate and you end up with about $140,000. Same discipline, same rate of return, a $160,000 gap from a 10-year delay. Compounding doesn't grade on effort. It only grades on when you started. 84% of Gen Z with student loan debt have put off major investments such as buying a home or starting a business. That statistic represents not just foregone wealth, but foregone time inside the compounding curve. The debt doesn't just cost what you pay back, it costs the years of compound growth you couldn't access because your capital was trapped in the obligation cycle. The real price of $37,000 in student debt is not $37,000. It's $37,000 plus every compounding dollar that capital would have generated over the next 2 or 3 decades if it had been deployed differently. You can't go back and change what the credential machine cost you, but you can stop letting the expense creep consume what's left. The third, stop measuring effort and start measuring outcomes. This is specifically the antidote to the treadmill problem. The hustle era produced an entire generation of people who are extremely skilled at tracking effort metrics and almost entirely unskilled at tracking outcome metrics. Effort metrics, hours worked, courses completed, content posted, connections made, books finished, mornings woken up early, productivity system iterations. These feel like progress. They are evidence of activity, but they are not evidence of compounding. Outcome metrics, total net worth today versus 12 months ago in absolute numbers, monthly income from assets or systems you own versus income that requires you to trade time, market priced value of your primary skill set outside your current employer, meaning what would a company that doesn't already employ you pay for this, monthly free cash flow trend across the last 12 months. These are harder to track, less emotionally satisfying in the short term, and almost entirely predictive of financial independence in the long term. If you optimize for effort metrics, you will become better and better at appearing productive. If you optimize for outcome metrics, you will get somewhere. And here is the part that closes the loop on burnout itself. The burnout doesn't go away when you work less. Reducing effort on a treadmill just means you walk instead of run. You're still going nowhere, just more slowly. The burnout goes away when the work starts compounding into something, when you can see the accumulation, when the next hour of work produces more than the last hour of work because you've built leverage underneath it. Purposeful work with visible compounding does not produce the same kind of exhaustion as purposeless work on a system designed by someone else for someone else's benefit. You can push extremely hard for years when you can feel the trajectory. The problem with the treadmill, the actual specific problem, is not that it requires effort, is that the effort produces no accumulation and the human brain is not built to sustain effort that it can detect is going nowhere. In 2025, 74% of Gen Z workers reported moderate to high burnout, making them the most burnt-out generation in the workforce. And this is not simply a case of young workers adjusting to adult life. This is a generation that got handed free interlocking extraction systems and was told each of them was a path. The credential system, the hustle system, the identity system. Each of them consumed energy and returned less than they took. And the natural output of running 3 extraction machines simultaneously at full speed before you have any leverage or any assets or any architecture that compounds is exhaustion, not weakness, not failure, not a mental health crisis in need of better coping strategies. A rational signal from a reasonably functional brain that has noticed the inputs and outputs don't balance. And that signal is correct. The error is in how people interpret it. Most people interpret it as, I need to rest more, work smarter, set better boundaries, practice gratitude, hire a therapist, take a digital detox. All of those things might help you feel better for a week. None of them change the architecture. The treadmill will still be there when you get back and the belt speed will still be set by someone else's incentives. The fix is not to run less on the treadmill. The fix is to understand that it's a treadmill, decide that your time horizon is longer than one paycheck, and start building the thing that actually moves. One leveraged skill, one asset you own, one system with a non-linear relationship between your effort and your output, a lifestyle that doesn't expand to erase the gap before the compounding has a chance to start. Nobody teaches this in any institution that profits from you not knowing it. Which, when you think about it, is almost every institution that was involved in your formation. If this framing is useful, if thinking in systems instead of effort is landing for you, subscribe. I keep making these because the leverage conversation is more important than the motivation conversation, and I haven't found many places that run it straight. It costs you nothing, and the next video builds directly on this.